we literally just went to a winery and get the pomace from the winery on a truck and brought it to Davis and fed to cows. And what we found was that the animals, first of all, were quite happy to eat the grape pomace.
They like wine just like we do.
They do. I mean, it's a nice sweet taste.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
There was an increase in milk yield. There was a slight decrease in intake that actually makes the feed efficiency even better. And then we saw methane emissions also lower by about 10%.
Well, thank you for joining us today on Clear Conversations. We are so excited to have our guest today. It is Ermias Kebreab. He is an animal scientist, a professor, an associate dean of global engagement at the College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences here at UC Davis, as well as the director of the World Food Center. And those are just a couple of your jobs. You do a lot. You're a very busy man, so we're really excited to have you here and for you to share some of your knowledge with us today. So thank you for being here.
No, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to talk about my favorite subject.
Well, first of all, tell us a little bit, and maybe for folks who are unfamiliar with your work and your research, how do you describe it to people? How do you describe what you're working on?
Yeah, so I work in the intersection of livestock productivity and environment. So really trying to increase livestock productivity and basically have a more sustainable livestock production system. At the same time, we have less impact on the environment as well. So those are the three things that I try to balance in the work I do.
Excellent. And what got you interested in this?
I was very interested mostly in the productivity aspect of it. So years and years ago, really working on the productivity, on the nutrition, really trying to understand the system. So we've built some of the mechanistic models that are still being used today to try to understand how sort of nutrition affects productivity. So that's really how I kind of get on this. But then later on, we realized that there is also another aspect of livestock production, which is the emissions, and particularly methane emissions. And so we start working on that a bit more and sort of developing, really trying to understand what are the mechanisms by which methane is being formed and emitted, and then what will be the potential to reduce methane emissions as well. So mostly on trying to understand the system and trying to do that through mathematical modeling. So we put together a lot of different models, try to understand the dynamics of how methane is formed and what factors affect the emission and all that. And then it was about 10 years ago or so, moved a little bit more into mitigation aspect of that. So still working on productivity, but now more and more focused on reducing the impact of livestock on the environment, and particularly focused on methane as well, because methane is quite a big issue in livestock systems. So that's how kind of my research evolved, from really looking into the productivity, into systems modeling, into mitigation.
Because it's all tied together, of course. And so if you've joined us on the podcast, we talk about methane a lot. Why is methane so important, or such an important topic in conversations when we talk about climate and animal agriculture?
Yeah, so methane has sort of unique characteristics compared to carbon dioxide or other pollutants. It's a short-lived climate pollutant, and I'm sure you've talked about this a lot in the podcast before as well. Over 20 years time frame is about 82 or more times more as effective as carbon dioxide in trapping heat, but only survives in the atmosphere about 10-12 years. And so while it is in the atmosphere, it's very, very effective as a greenhouse gas. And so reducing that means that it would really give us a sort of a quick way to try to limit the impact of greenhouse gases. So that's why we kind of focus on methane. And if you look at where methane comes from, about a third or so is coming from livestock related work. So that's why it's really important for the environment, as also from the livestock systems. And it also helps that methane is energy, which means that we can redirect it to something else, but also it can be taken up by the animals as to grow for tissue and all that. So you can increase productivity theoretically if you reduce methane.
So let's talk about some of your research, because you've done some really innovative work over the years and gotten a lot of attention, rightfully so. So tell us a little bit about your research that you've been working on.
Yeah, so the research that I've focused on over the last 10 years or so is really trying to come up with a way to mitigate or reduce methane emissions. And we looked at the different things on that. And one of the things that we worked on was probably now 2017 or so, is related with the seaweed, and that was mostly working with people in Australia, where they did the sort of the first in vitro assessment of different types of seaweed, and they found out that one particular species reduces emissions quite a bit in vitro. And then working with an entrepreneur here in California, we thought, well, that's something that might work in animals as well, because sometimes you can see things working in vitro, but when it comes into in vivo, it doesn't work. The rumen adapts very quickly and all that. But with this, because of the mode of action, we thought that it would work well, but I didn't know how well it worked. So when we tried it here, I was really shocked to see the level of reduction that we've seen with a very small amount of the seaweed. I mean, there were some trade-offs also, because this is a new thing, and the animals also are quite picky when it comes to what they eat. And so we did notice a lower intake when we added this the seaweed at a certain level. But then if we actually kept it low, if you kept it, let's say, below 0.3% of the feed that you're offering, then it becomes much better, and the palatability is better, and then animals are able to consume it. So that's kind of the start of the work that we've done over the years. And so we started with the dairy cattle, which was quite effective, but then we saw this palatability issue, so we tried to address it, and we worked in beef cattle to do that with a lower dose of the inclusion rate of the seaweed. And that was quite effective, and we saw about 80% or so reduction in feedlot cattle. And then we moved on to sort of different formulations. So we were using powder, and then right now we have a project looking into using oil. So this kind of infused in oil. So that kind of the palatability issue is no longer an issue. If you use oil, it's no longer an issue. So animals are quite happy to consume it. It's completely mixed with the feed. So we haven't seen any kind of reduction in intake or productivity. In fact, the productivity may actually be better. We haven't finished the work yet, but hopefully by the end of the year, hopefully we'll be able to get something out for publication. But what we're seeing right now is that it might even be better. But the palatability issue and all that there's no problem. We've seen this is in beef cattle. So the average daily gain was at the same, if not better, for the feedlot cattle. So towards the end of the trial, like at the feedlot stage, that's where we're seeing some sort of changes in body weight gain. So that's what we've been doing mostly on the seaweed side. But at the same time, we were also trying to integrate data from different types of mitigation, like for example, the 3-NOP. We've done a couple of studies where we looked at all the 3-NOP that was done at the time. There was one paper we did in 2023. So we basically looked at all of the trials around the world that was done, and then synthesized that information so that it's much easier for people to understand, or it's very practical to use it in a protocol. If you want to know how much reduction you're going to get, it's not really possible to go and measure each animal. If you have thousands of animals, you can't do that. So you have to have a way to synthesize this data that's coming from all over the world, and then you can come up with the recommendations. And so that's what we did for 3-NOP for dairy cattle. And then last year, or maybe earlier this year, we had another one for beef cattle, also with the 3-NOP. And we looked at others like tannins. A lot of people have done some work on tannins. So what we did was to, again, synthesize this data and make it much more practical for people to see, okay, if you include tannins at this level, this type, then this is the reduction I'm going to get. And the same thing we did with seaweed, not just seaweed, but all bromoform-based supplements. So since the seaweed, there was a lot of inspiration from that, and people have come up with synthetic bromoform in different forms. And that seems to work quite well. We did one study here at UC Davis where we saw up to 90-95% reduction using the oil form of synthetic bromoform. And then we synthesized all the data on bromoform that was done until last year, 2025. And then we came up with recommendations and suggestions of what is the impact of seaweed or other bromofoam based supplements in mitigating methane emissions. So this is like kind of a living document, right? Because there's more and more work coming up every year, every month. If you look at it, there's always something published about methane. If you look at Journal of Dairy Science or Animal Science, there's always at least one paper coming out on this. So we have to kind of keep on adding this work and then making it, refine it, and sort of try to understand exactly what the impacts are.
Right, and understand it for producers as well, as you're saying too, so they understand kind of the ramifications of how we can mitigate methane, but also what they need to do. Back to the seaweed real quick. So what made you look into seaweed in the first place? What made you think that seaweed could be a feed additive that could mitigate methane?
So that really came from the publication from the James Cook University in Australia. And they did that with CSIRO. They did the first sort of assessment of different type of seaweed, and they saw one particular one, Asparagopsis, to reduce quite a bit. So that's really how it started, and then the connection that I had with an entrepreneur at the time was based in at Stanford, and came in and so we talked about it, and I was interested, but I didn't have the funds to actually do something about it. But she was very helpful. It's like, okay, I'll get the funds, you do the research. So
perfect.
Yes,
I can do that.
So we did that, and it worked out quite well, and we're still continuing to collaborate and still work up to this day.
Still doing that. And early life intervention, working on that with seaweed too? Or,
yes, yeah. So the early life intervention was really looking into if we start early enough, before the methanogens get hold in the rumen, could we effectively reprogram the rumen environment, right? So there was one work that was done using 3-NOP, and that seems to have worked quite well, at least for about a year or so. We have seen some reductions, but it hasn't been replicated as much as I thought it would be. So we decided to do this work with seaweed and this oil-based supplement. And for us, the main issue is that not just looking at that and measure the emissions, but also look into the microbiome as well. So working with UC Berkeley and with my colleague Matthias Hess here at UC Davis, we are taking samples every month. When they were younger, maybe every 2 weeks, and then every month, to look at the microbiome development. So when you are introducing this supplement, it could be any methane inhibiting supplement. It could be 3-NOP, it could be seaweed, it could be others. But in this case, we chose seaweed in the oil form. And the expectation is that at the dose that we're giving is about 50% if you give it on a daily basis. But we had animals, a group of animals that we start feeding them right at the beginning, right after they're born, like 2 days after they're born, we started supplementing so that the methanogens would not get foothold. And then after 2 months, so just when they are weaned, maybe a week or two after they are weaned, we stop the treatment. And then we just continue measuring the emissions, but we don't provide the supplement. So so we're trying to see what change, what kind of change happening in the rumen, and we've seen reduction of emissions for months. Again, we will hopefully publish this paper in December, but we have seen this reduction of emissions continue, not as much as when you feed them on a daily basis, but this is, you stop it after 2 months, and then you still continue for months on end, you still continue to see reduction in emissions. But the cool thing is that we are right now analyzing the microbiome makeup. So what kind of microbiome makeup, and what was kind of the abundance of methanogens, and which ones were selected, and so really trying to understand what happened. And is there a different way to do this more effectively as well, right? So, yeah, so trying to understand the mechanisms underlying this change that we're seeing in reduced methane emissions after you stop this. Yeah.
Incredible. And CRISPR, you're working with CRISPR as well.
Yeah. So they're all kind of related. So
Yeah.
with the CRISPR, what we're trying to do is that we're understanding the microbiome developments. So we're doing this longitudinal study. Again, looking at how the microbiome develops from the first day, and even including the dam, and all the way until harvest, and see how the microbiome changes. And we have another group of animals where we supplement with seaweed, and then trying to understand, okay, what happens when methane is being inhibited, right? So trying to understand who is there and who is really maybe becoming more abundant and all that. And using that information, then we can target some of the genes that are responsible for methane formation, or what, as it turns out, we are actually now more interested on the bacteria that can utilize hydrogen. Under normal circumstances, these are outcompeted by the methanogens. Like, so if you look at the energy transfer, so thermodynamically, they are not favored. The methanogens are much more effective thermodynamically, so that's why they are the ones that take up most of the hydrogen. But if they are reduced through any means, whether it could be CRISPR or whatever, there would be others that would use that hydrogen as well. So now we're thinking, well, you may not even have to reduce to change the methanogens. If you somehow upregulate those bacteria that have the hydrogenase enzyme, then you may be doing two things at the same time. One is, you are competing with the methanogens, so you reduce methane emissions. On the other hand, you're actually increasing the nutrient available for the animal as well. So the productivity increases, methane reduces, so it's kind of a win-win kind of situation. So that's why we kind of look into that more at the moment. But the idea, after 5 years or so of this project, is to try to come up with edited microbiome, so that we can reduce methane as much as possible, at the same time also redirect that hydrogen to other microbes so that we can increase productivity as well.
That's fascinating. And that's a 7-year project, right?
It's a 7 years project.
Okay,
yes.
That's really interesting. I got to say. And also, you had at one time worked with tannins and grape seeds and stems and that. Tell me a little bit about that, because that's really interesting too. You're taking kind of a byproduct that would go to waste and using it. And I would think the cows would like it because it's kind of sweeter. It's got kind of an interesting taste to it. But did you find anything interesting in that?
Yeah. So again, the idea is really to try to use whatever byproduct that we have and really upcycle those nutrients in there, which would have been lost or worse, converted into methane or something like that. Yeah. California, we have a lot of great wines, and there's a lot of grape pomace left over that can be used as animal feed, because it has high contents of tannins, and also it has high other
fats, right? Like Italian fat?
So it's different types of compounds there as well that could reduce methane emissions, or also they also have fatty acids that improve the quality of fatty acids in milk as well. So we were interested in looking at 3 ways in terms of using byproducts to substitute some other forages that have a higher greenhouse gas emission associated with them, and then looking into the actual potential for reducing methane emissions or productivity. And then the third one is the improvement of quality of milk as well. So we worked with the Department of Food and Science Technology here at UC Davis, because they do the milk analysis and all that, so we don't have the capacity to do all that. So they take care of all the milk analysis, the fatty acid analysis, and also the tannin content of the grapes. So before we started, we did kind of a mini experiment where we looked at what is the higher concentration of tannins and other compounds that we are interested in. And we looked at sort of fresh pomace, we looked at dried pomace, and then we looked at dried and ground pomace. So the fresh pomace actually had the highest amount of the tannins and all that. So we decided, okay, let's go with the fresh pomace. So we literally just went to a winery and get the pomace from the winery on a truck and brought it to Davis and fed to cows. Obviously, scientifically designed experiment and all that. And what we found was that the animals, first of all, were quite happy to eat the grape pomace.
They like wine just like we do.
They do. I mean, it's a nice sweet taste.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
10%, 15%. I mean, that's quite a lot. I mean, a dairy cow consuming 25 kilos, 10% is like 2.5 kilos a day. This is dry matter. So in fresh weight would be a lot more. They're consuming quite a lot of the grape pomace, and they were happily doing that. And what we found was that there was an increase in milk yield. So yeah, the milk yield actually increased. There was a slight decrease in intake that actually makes it the feed efficiency even better. So better feed efficiency, and then we saw methane emissions also lower by about 10%. As well, and then the polyunsaturated fatty acid content in the milk has increased. So it has benefit for human health in terms of the milk quality, and you use byproducts, which is found in California. So it's kind of like a really win-win kind of situation, where we hope to continue working with this was supported by the California Dairy Research Foundation. So it really came from farmers, the interest of farmers to actually use this and to study how they can incorporate it. And when we look at it, actually there's not even enough pomace around to feed all the cattle we have in California.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it will really be able to close the loop, of wine production with the pomace going into as animal feed. And we're looking similarly with the olive pomace also. So hopefully we can do some work on olive pomace that would, I would expect there would be similar results as well. Yeah, so this circular sort of economy idea is really great, because now we can utilize all the byproducts that we can. Similarly, we did some work with almond hulls, and I mean almond hulls already are used a lot in dairy.
Right.
About 8% of the lactating dairy ration is almond hulls in California. So what we tried to do was, what if we start the fermentation process earlier, and then provide to the animals. So instead of having the almond hull directly, we can actually do some fermentation ahead of time, like a silage kind of thing, and then provide it to the animals. And we did that experiment last year. And what we saw was that there was also a reduction in methane emissions by doing that, and also an improvement in milk yield. So that's a really good result, but the question is whether the economics work. Doing the silage pre-fermentation before you give it to them, does the cost of doing that outweigh the benefit in terms of milk yield and all that? So we have to do the economics after this, but in terms of working in improving productivity and reducing emissions, that's something that we can do as well.
And it's always a balancing act to do that, right?
Yeah.
Because you work closely with producers here in California. Talk a little bit about that. What's it like working with the producers and hearing what they need, and how you can maybe help solve their problems, but also solve bigger problems for the environment?
Yeah, so the dairy farmers in California are very open and very interested in sustainability. I mean, they put their money, on this sustainability issue. Every year you have lots of projects that's going on that is supported by dairy farmers, not coming from anywhere else, but actually dairy farmers asking questions: how can we be more sustainable? They are very much open in terms of, like, if there is a way to reduce methane emissions, they would like to do it. I mean, it has to be in a sustainable way, but very open to do that, very open to working with us, and they're very open looking into what are the innovations coming up and how they can include those innovations within their farming system as well. So we do work with in farmers' fields to make sure that whatever we see under controlled conditions is transferable under commercial conditions as well. So they're very open in working with us to make sure that this is something that's helpful for the farmers and for people in California and beyond. So we have a very good relationship working with farmers. I think they're interested in the solutions that we are trying to look into and advance, and also the same thing with the policy makers in Sacramento also, making sure that they understand what are the limits and of what we can do. Like, we can say, yes, we want to reduce emissions by 70%, but if there's no actual practical way to do that, there's just no way of doing it. It just becomes a penalty. So you have to be like, okay, there's 2 or 3 different ways you can reach 25% or 40%. Then I think farmers will be like, okay, this makes sense. Then we can do it, and tell us how to do it, and we'll do it. So I think it's great to inform the policymakers as well as the farmers of what is possible and what is sort of economical to do on farm as well.
Yeah. Yeah, because it has to be economical for them. It has to be. As well, you brought me to my next question about the State of the Science Summit that we always have, because we have policymakers there, we have industry leaders, we have farmers there. How do you think that event kind of moves the needle in research and methane research and mitigating methane? You know, how important is it to you? Because you'll be part of it again this year.
Yeah. So I think this summit is very unique because, you know, methane mitigation is not just a science problem. I mean, that's just, you know, something that it is part of a much larger thing. That obviously the science has to be there, but it also involves policy, like you said. You know, it involves the farmers and industry and people who are interested in coming up. You know, the startup companies, and so, you know, it's quite a large amount of organizations that are interested in this area, and it takes a village to be able to move this. Otherwise, you know, if you just do the science and then we publish it and then nobody reads it, there's no point. But I think with the summit, it really brings people from different perspectives, and then people who do science, they talk about science, and then people who are doing policy, they can understand, okay, you know, this is what is possible. Maybe this is when we put policy down, we can say, you know, the range of available solutions are this, and it may be work in California here, or if they are thinking of doing some research, they can direct their funding to things that are maybe missing, or they, you know, if they wanted to do to see if some work that was presented works in New Zealand. You know, the California policymakers might think, okay, how does it work in California? Like, we have different diets, you know, it's more, you have New Zealand grazing, here is more intensive, so how does it work? Or vice versa. But people coming from New Zealand and they see some of the work that has been done here, and they're thinking, okay, how can we use this in our environments? So yeah, it's a really great forum for people that are looking at the same problem from different lens, right? And that's the main thing, is then you bring everybody together, you really discuss and hash it out, and there are people who are developing protocols and carbon credits, you know, and then you meet people who are interested in that, and then there are people who are doing the industry that are developing will be additives or any other solutions. You know, all of that comes together.
I'm just curious, the conversations at the summit are always really interesting to me. Have you seen the conversation change around methane? And you've been doing this a long time. I'm just curious, have you seen it kind of change over the last few years? Like, are people kind of getting it or understanding the need to reduce it?
I think so. I think I see a lot of interest. I guess the level of interest in this area is very high. So that tells me that, you know, people are understanding that, you know, working on methane and methane issues is something that would give a benefit to society. So whether it is from the sort of funding agencies, or whether it's from policymakers, whether it is from industry, there is an increased amount of activity that's happening. You know, here at UC Davis, we are kind of flat out doing all this research, you know, one after the other, or two or three at the same time. So the pace of it is increasing. Like I mentioned earlier, you know, if you look at what's been published, you always see 2 or 3 papers in those journals published every month. So around the world, there's a lot of work that's been done and that's been focused on this issue. So yeah, I would say people are getting it, and I think people understand that this is something that can be solved, and lots of people working towards it.
That's excellent. Yeah, and what makes you hopeful for the future of this kind of research? What makes you hopeful?
Well, I see that, you know, things that we have been doing is kind of almost started to translate into practice and being adopted by farmers, and so that makes me a lot hopeful. And you see the work that we're doing here being translated, and people use it, and you know, graduates being interested in going into this field, and also have their own innovations and contribution to this as well. So all of that, you know, makes me a lot hopeful that, okay, this work is in good hands.
Yes, yes it is, sir. Yes it is. Well, I can't thank you enough. You know, we talk a lot about having all the tools in the toolbox to fight this issue, and you're certainly helping create new tools and working on new tools in that toolbox. So I can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge with us today on the podcast. We really, really appreciate it. You're a very busy man, so we appreciate you joining us today, and we appreciate you joining us. We'll see you next time on Clear Conversations.